So I'm particularly pleased to open this session on labor market with this paper, in particular with this Techies trades and skill-biased productivity paper. Also because actually Daron Acemoglu has fueled the literature the last couple of days. Okay. So minus 2 minutes. So also because actually Daron has fueled the literature on this topic. Here, what we do with James and Ariel, two of my colleagues and friends, what we do, we look at this particular question through the firm level evidence. Okay, so this is something that we call Techies trade and skill-biased productivity firm level evidence for a big country such as France. So we've got a couple of very old but urgent question on the issue of the determinant of productivity growth and how this productivity growth will impact relative demand of skilled labor. This is really important and really important right now in France as well. Recent works has also shown that globalization and offshoring in particular might have an impact on productivity growth and relative demand. And here, what we will do in this paper, we will take a fresh look at those questions by estimating first X-neutral and skill-biased productivity and looking at whether technological change and globalization have an impact on those productivity components. Okay? So what we will do, we will estimate causal effect of techies and trade. I will come back to this notion of techies in a couple of minutes. And trade on productivities. Let me just give you the two key results of our analysis. What we find that firms with more techies or firms that trade and or firms that trade have faster productivity growth that go through skill augmenting productivity, okay? And they enjoy greater skill intensity. So basically, the skill bias component of productivity will just shift the labor demand towards skilled people, skilled workers, okay? Here I'm not talking about conditional correlation, I'm talking about causal impact, okay? And you will see that our methodology addresses those causal impact, okay? So why do we need another paper on this subject? Well, we think that actually there is really very little credible evidence at firm level, at firm employee level on this particular topic, okay? This is a really important topic that must be addressed through the lens of the firm because actually the firms, when we account for firms, we can help understanding aggregate trends, we can inform theory, and this is also fairly important, and I know that, for policymakers. Okay, this has huge implications for policymakers. Let me give you a simple example. Here, what I will do, I will juxtapose two papers. There is this Berman, Bound, and Grillikus paper in '94, and there is this Bernard and Jensen '97 paper. Okay? If I look at Berman, Bound, and Grillikus paper in '94, what they tell us that, well, I guess it was this amount, 70% of the increase of the wage of non-production workers in the US was accounted by within industry impact. Now, Berman and Jensen, what they do, they take exactly the same underlying data as in Berman, Bound, and Grillikus, exactly the same underlying data, but at firm level. Actually, this was at establishment level. And what they show that this is not the within industry component that matter, but plant growth. And in particular, large firm exporters have a deep impact on the wage of non-production workers. Okay, this is the within industry plant level analysis matters for driving the results. So we've got a bunch of papers by Altiwanger and co-authors, and now even labor economists are moving toward this firm level analysis. I'm thinking about David Otto's Superstar paper. Okay, this is a plant level analysis. The second component of our analysis is to use structural econometrics. Okay, so what we have, we've got structural econometrics with firm level data. Okay, what we will do is we will move away from R&D as being an approximation of those technological change and patent data. Why do we move away from R&D and patent data? Also because if you look at firm-level data, you will see that those R&D and patent data are lumpy investment. At industry level, you don't see that. At firm level, you see it, okay? So those are lumpy investment that might be problematic for our purpose. Instead, what we will do, we will consider techies, the share of techies, the share of the wage bill. I mean, techies as a share of the wage bill, as mediators of technological change, okay? So we have this structural estimation of the X and skill-biased productivity component. And then once we have these two components, what we will do, we will explain those two components by technological change, approximated by the techies, and globalization, approximated by trade, okay? So how do we define those techies? Who are those techies? Those techies are actually well identified in our database. We've got the occupational codes of those workers in the firm, so we can identify really precisely who are the techies. The techies are two numbers, basically, 38 and 47. The 38 are the technical managers and engineers, and the 47 are the technicians. So we've got a precise description of what those guys are doing in the firm. It's not just like two lines. We've got few paragraphs on what the guys are doing in the firms in our data set. And as you can see, I mean, this is the two-digit codes, and then you have the four-digit codes. As you can see that those guys are not only doing R&D and ICT, information and communication technologies, they are performing a bunch of other technology-related activities, okay? So they are not only doing ICT and R&D. So techies, and this is well identified in the management literature, a couple of papers by Tambe and Heath, Eteland, Brynjolfsson and Heath. Techies, what they do, they maintain, develop, install ICT and other technologies in the firms. And if you read carefully those papers in the management literature, they tell you that techies actually are fueling technological adoption in this society, okay? This is what the management literature is telling you. Well, in our paper, in former paper on job polarization in France, what we show that those techies are increasingly prevalent in France. Let me give you a number. From 2000 to 2013, the share in the wage bill, the share of techies in France increased by 30%, okay, from 17% to 22%, which is a lot, actually. And what we show in this paper, we show that they explain firm employment growth and job polarization. There is a couple of other papers by Bars Davis, Freeman, and Wong that show that actually techies, most of those techies do not perform only ICT and R&D. They do other things, other related activities that are related to technology. And those techies are positively associated to productivity and to growth, okay? Is it a good, a recent idea? Well, if you think about the British Industrial Revolution, and this is what Mokier will tell you, well, the British Industrial Revolution rests on who the workers, basically, that was processing the technical skills and technological competencies, basically. This is what actually Mokier, Ograda, and Kelly are telling you. So those techies might not be the inventors, okay? They might not be the guys that are inventing the technology, but actually those are the guys that are diffusing or conduits the diffusion of those technology in the society. So turning back to our firm-level productivity estimation, well, obviously you've got tons of papers using Cobb-Douglas, but this won't help us, actually, because we have to move away from this Cobb-Douglas literature, assuming we are looking at skill-biased technological change. So what we will do, we will just like assume a production function which is SAS. And we base our analysis or extend the analysis of those three scholars here, Grecchioli and Lang, a super nice paper published in the International Economic Review. What they do, they solve for the missing input price problem, Okay, the price of material is not known, so they solve for it. Well, their methodology loosens the timing assumption. This is a really simplistic even estimation procedure. They show in the Monte Carlo study that actually this GLZ methodology is more efficient than any OP, Oli-Peckus, Levinson and Petrin, or even the newest ACF, published in Econometrics, by the way. It's even more efficient than the OP type of estimator. And what we will do here, we will extend their methodology, okay? And we extend their methodology, as you will see in a couple of minutes, by including neutral and skill-biased technological change. So you've got two papers in the literature looking at technological change at firm level. You've got this nice paper by Joraszewski and Joma Andreu, where they show that actually R&D force has an impact on labor bias changes, okay? So you've got a two-step productivity estimator. They have strong timing assumption for identification in this paper. And then a paper which is really close to us, this is a paper by Bowler. And what she shows that R&D is also the forcing variable. R&D will just like lead to skill-biased productivity, okay? She's got a sample of Norwegian data to show it, but actually the sample has very few firms, okay? So she cannot do a pure, perfect industry-level decomposition because actually she's got only 2,000 plus firms in her sample. So she does not study the evolution of neutral productivity as we will do, okay? And actually, she does not control for the X component in the productivity evolution, which is really important, as you will see in a couple of minutes. Okay. So what I will do now, I will just like, of course, there is related IDs, and Daron Acemoglu is all over the place there. For sake of time, I'm skipping the related IDs, okay? So the plan of the talk is as follows. What I will show you in a few slides the econometric framework, then I will show you the data and then the results, okay? So in order to really understand our economic framework, let me sketch the methodology, okay? So I'll sketch it and then you can just like take a nap for a couple of minutes. I will go into details. So what we will do in step one, so this is a two-step analysis. In step one, basically, you derive the productivity components. In step two, what you do, you explain those productivity components. So in step one, what we will do, we will assume output to be produced by a sales production function. We extend GLZ by assuming 4 factors of production, okay? S, L, M, and K, skilled, unskilled, capital, and material. We extend GLZ by assuming actually 2 productivity components, a X-neutral productivity component and a skill bias productivity component, the skill augmenting productivity. What we will take an assumption in this model, okay? We assume that techies affect output only through productivity, okay? They do not affect output directly. And I will just like show you the science of the bias later on, okay? So this is what you would call the strong assumption, and I will show you that actually it's not too strong, okay? So the techies affect output only through productivity, not directly, they do not have a direct impact on output. Then what we will assume that these omegas, the productivity component, are known to the firm when choosing input. This will deliver an estimator of the revenue function, and then estimating this revenue function, we will get our estimated productivity. Okay, this is the first step. In the second step, what we assume that those productivity follows a first Markov order process, okay? So this is a first order Markov process, sorry. And what we will explain these first order Markov processes by the lag of techies, export, import, and the lag productivity components. So basically, by including the lag productivity component in these Markov equations, Well, you control for endogeneity so that those are noises, and we've got the causal impact of the lag effects on the X-neutral and the skill bias productivity components. Okay, so this is fairly important to control for those two animals here, those two components in this controlled Markov process. Okay, so let me go through the methodology a little bit more in details. So start by this output function, okay? So what we show that normalization we need to normalize the sales productivity production function, by the way. Actually, this goes back to the analysis of McFadden, Diamond, and Rodriguez in '78. Okay, so where they show that actually, in order to pin down the distribution parameters in this sales function, you need to normalize it. Okay, you won't pin it down otherwise. So there is a nice paper about that by Léon Ledesma and DAR. So we normalize the data series by their geometric mean, and we've got this animal here, which is the production function. So this is a sales production function with S, L, and M being static inputs. Okay, they are chosen after the realization of the productivity after the productivity component. So those are static inputs, so that actually we will use their first order necessary condition to solve the model. Okay. The dynamic input is the capital stock in our analysis, and actually we won't use it. We don't need it to solve the model. And sigma, this is the elasticity of substitution, which is non-negative. So this is the production function. It is SAS with 4 factors. We've got skill, unskill, material expenditure, static input, and capital stock, which is just like the dynamic input. So what about the demand and revenue? We've got the sales demand, and what we assume actually an exogenous industry level demand shifters, and actually eta, this is the constant elasticity of demand that will be needed to be estimated. We need to estimate that. And later on, I will tell you that actually this eta here and the sigma there are also crucial in this literature on race with or against the machine, as we will see in the keynote lecture. Okay, this is super important for this literature. Okay, so this the comparison between eta and sigma. So this demand and the production function, what they deliver revenue, a revenue which is just like at the form of, let's call it SES revenue, with UT being the revenue shifters, and these revenue shifters will just like absorb measurement error and unanticipated productivity shocks. It is completely unknown to the firms when the firm is choosing its input. So profit maximization, now we assume profit maximization. We've got 3 static inputs, okay? And in the revenue function, actually, we've got 2 unobservables here. The first unobservable that we have is material, because actually we don't know the price of material. So this is the first unobservable. The second unobservable that we have in there, this is just like the skill component, because it is measured in efficiency unit, okay? It has this skill bias component in front of it, so this is measured in efficiency unit. This is unobservable, okay? So we've got 2 unobservables, but 3 basically static inputs, so we can solve the model, okay? So this is how we solve the model. We use the first order necessary condition with these 3 factors and 2 unobservables. We can express material as a function of expenditures in material, okay? And we can express the skill labor input in efficiency units as expenditures on skills, the wage bill basically, that the relative wage bill of skills versus unskilled people, okay? So this is how we will solve the model. So, well, it comes with few steps, and after a couple of steps, the magic occurs and you end up with this function, which is the revenue function that you will need to estimate. Okay, so a bit of magical occurs after the steps when you rewrite the first order necessary conditions and you manipulate the revenue functions. These revenue functions here, this is the one that you will estimate, depend on 6 parameters of interest, and you can solve it really nicely just because you assume normalization, you have constant return to scales, and this estimation will deliver a number for the ratio of alpha k over alpha L. Okay, so basically you can solve this equation numerically and econometrically, basically. Okay. By the way, just like a side, the error component in this revenue function need to be unserially correlated. Otherwise this is badaboom. The model will explode. So we do not have any assumption about the stochastic process of productivity. This is Greco, Lee, and Zhang. I mean, they do not rely at all on the stochastic process of productivity. What we will do, we will estimate this equation by nonlinear least square, and since we want to say something about the aggregate, we will weight those regressions. Okay, so we have a weighted nonlinear least square. And actually what we will do, because we've got this huge firm level data set in France, we will do it by industry. Okay? So today I will show you the pooled estimate. The industry level estimate are in the paper or in the draft of the paper. Okay, so I will just like focus on the pooled, and I will tell you some elements concerning the industry level analysis. Okay, do you have any question on the methodology? Good. So when you estimate this revenue function, this delivers 2 productivity components, the X-neutral productivity component, which is this long and ugly animal here, and the skill bias component here, which is a nice and really understandable equation. So in the second step, what you do, you take each of those productivity components, assume that they follow a first-order Markov process, okay, and regress by OLS these productivity components on what? On the lag Techies share of wage bill, okay? This here, this is a dummy variable for firms that are exporters the year before. This is a dummy variable for firms that were importers the year before. And then we introduce also some interaction terms that are not necessary in the analysis. Okay, this will deliver another type of model. I mean, this is just like, we don't know whether actually there is complementarity versus substitutability between techies and export and trade in the production function. This was for us to build the theoretical framework. Okay, so, and then we have a bunch of controls. What are those controls? We control for revenue lag revenue. We control for the age of the firm. We control for the square and the cubic of those productivity components, the lag productivity components. And we have, for the pool regression, we have industry and year fixed effect. This could, for example, control for import competition in that sector. Okay. But when we do the industry level analysis, we have time fixed effect. Okay. We control for the global business cycle. So our model is completely silent on why firm choose techies and trade. We cannot say anything about that. And actually, these results here, these betas that we will estimate are causal effect because actually, as I said before, we control for the lagged, where are they? They are here. We control for the lag productivity component in the Markov process. Okay, and this lag productivity component gathering all the information about selection and persistence, basically. Okay, do we have a bias through misspecification? I come back to my first assumption. The first assumption was, well, techies, what they do, they enter into this productivity process as investment, but they do not affect directly output. Okay, so this might bias completely the analysis. Okay. So, well, we can do a little bit of maths and derive whether actually this bias the productivity upwards or downwards, okay? And what we can show that actually the estimates of the X-neutral component will be biased upward for the Techies-intensive firms, because actually what you do when you estimate without the Techies in the first stage, well, you retrieve one input, okay? Given the level of output, you have one less input. The output that you observe is still the same, so basically you've got an upward bias for the X-neutral component. Now, what about the skill component of productivity, the skill bias component of productivity? You've got a downward bias of the skill bias, the omega S, the skill augmenting component. Why do we have an upward bias? Because simply techies belong to the S, they are skilled people, and you, by taking them away, you've got less S, okay? You've got less skilled people, that's it, okay? In the second stage, there is no bias because you've got a controlled Markov process, okay? Now what we did is something simple. To see whether actually our way of thinking was wrong or true or in between even, what we did is something really simple. Assume that actually techies belong to the output process, okay, directly. They affect output directly. What you can do is estimating the same two-step analysis by taking this techies share and adding it to the S in the first stage, okay? And in the second stage, you estimate your second stage analysis with the lag techies. Now, if techies do not affect productivity, well, the effect in the second stage should not be there. And this is not what we see, okay? So basically, the estimates, when we take into of productivity and the second stage, when we take into account the techies in the first stage, when they affect productivity output directly, well, show us that, well, techies might affect output, but also have an impact on productivity. Okay. The data. So this is France, a centralized country. So we've got access to a lot of data. What we have here, we've got 17 broad industries for the year 2000-2013. Okay. We've got firm-level data, or let me be precise on that. We've got employee data, employee-level data, for each firm in France, okay? We know their occupation, their wage. We know a lot of information about those workers. This is called the DADS post. So we've got labor inputs by detailed occupation, and the occupation, I call them PCS, Profession Catégorie Socio-Professionnelle. So I'm not going to translate that in English. So this is the occupation, PCS. And then you've got, this is the worker side of the data, and then you've got the balance sheets elements that we will need to compute basically capital, for example. This comes from Ficus Farm. This is the balance sheet data on revenue, capital stock, material expenditure. So we've got information at the level of the firm for most of firms in France. I mean, this is the threshold is by, correct me if I'm wrong, 100,000, Isabelle? The threshold for this French custom data. This is 100,000. They declare above. Yeah, you'll talk about that later on. So this is 100,000. So fairly exhaustive number of firms that are exporting and importing. And what you can do, this is the beauty of the French system, you can merge them, all the data set using one single identifier, which is called the sirene. So and what is nice is the sirene stays. The firm keep its sirene because in France we don't view the firm as in the US as a firm but as a legal entity. Okay, so this is a legal entity, the sirene will stay. Okay, so we merge them and we've got an excellent match. 90% of the observation are matched. Labor occupation, PCS codes, you've got the hours worked, what is in S, owners, managers, and professional, non-techies. What is in L? We've got middle managers, workers in retail, wholesale, skilled and unskilled blue collars, personal services and drivers. And the techies, well, the techies hours worked as share of the wage bill. We've got ICT technicians, engineers, supervisors, R&D workers, and other technicians and engineers from 2000 to 2013. Now, what we can do is look at the data a little bit more precisely, okay? So when you go in the data, you will see that after 2009, you can distinguish different type of techies according to their occupation, according to what they do, their task, basically, okay? So look at those numbers. In non-manufacturing, you've got 52% of those techies are performing ICT tasks. In manufacturing, 29%. In non-manufacturing, 4% are performing R&D tasks, and in manufacturing, 20%. Okay, so we can disentangle those techie shares according to R&D and ICT. Okay, so this gave us the opportunity to look at a more precise definition of our techie. We call them the narrow techies, those workers that are performing R&D and ICT. Okay, and you cannot disentangle those two. We can do that, actually, but the effect would be the same, okay? We test that. Actually, the effects are the same. So we have two samples. We have one sample from 2000 to 2013, which is our baseline with the broad techies definition. This is the 38 and the 47, all techies all together. And we've got a second sample from 2009 to 2013, where actually we just like separate ICT and R&D workers from the rest of the techies, and the rest of the techies, they are allocated to the S, okay? This is what we do. So revenue, capital, and so on. Well, we had a little bit of hard time, and I thank the Banque de France to have helped me a lot computing the real capital stock. In particular, you helped me a lot. So the book value deflated by industry investment price, and actually this is like by average age of the capital. This is our real capital stock measure. We've got dummy variable for importing and exporting, and we've got nominal revenue and material expenditure from the balance sheet data. The estimation sample, so you come up with a big sample that you have to trim a little bit. We eliminate firms we exit and re-enter, churning firms. We eliminate them from the DADS. We keep only firms with non-zero factor shares, basically, because actually you cannot run the CES, the revenue TFP, without implicitly doing this. We have two samples, 2009, 2013. This is the one that I will show you today, okay? And 2000, 2013, this is the one that where techies are, all techie workers are included in the techie variable, okay? So this is the raw data. So 19 industry minus 2, those industry coke, refined petroleum, pharmaceutical products, they are too small, so drop them, okay? We've got 2 million observations, 500,000 firms in the analysis. There are particular sectors as well. I mean, those 9, 10, and 11, this is computers, electronic, electrical equipment, machinery equipment. Here you guess that actually techies are far more than entering the second stage of our analysis. They are affecting directly the output, so they belong to us. So actually, our model does not fit those sectors, okay? So basically, we will just like focus on the sectors 1, 2, 3, 5, chemical products, 7, 8, and the rest, okay, the services sectors. As you see, and this is something that I can tell you up front, the distribution across sectors does not change so much from in those two samples. In 2000, 2013, 2009, 2013, you see exactly the same distribution, not only in terms of observation, in terms of firm, but also in terms of revenue and hours, percentage of hours, okay? So anyway, when we run the first step analysis, the results are quite similar, the second step as well, okay? Okay, so let me show you the results. How am I doing with time? Yeah, I have 2 minutes. A little bit more because I started with this. So we have a reasonable production function parameter estimates. I will show you them. Two-stage pool across industry. I will show you that. I will just like a few lines on what we find in terms of industries, okay? So there is no need to show you tables on that. I will perform some economic quantification, tell you something about the implied, this is the key, I mean, this is really key, this implied relative demand shifts. Not today, no time. we did tons of robustness checks, okay? Export by destination, we include TNS, use an indicator of technology, drop top bottom 5% of the firms, drop age, do some specification checks. So this is the production function estimates, and they are all significant in all industries, okay? What we know that actually we were comparing our omega H, the X neutral component, to what they find in the literature, because actually at firm level you don't find anything. So we were just like trying to compare those things, and basically the productivity distribution is completely reasonable, and it is comparable to the literature. Here, what I was telling you before, if you look at sigma and eta, we find that actually our eta, okay, the demand elasticity is larger than the elasticity of substitution, which might just like tell you, and we are not sure about that. If I have time, I tell you why. We might tell you that actually in France, we are racing with the machine and not against the machine. Basically, you've got productivity that has an impact on skill bias demand. So you increase a lot you have a greater skill intensity within firm, but also you increase the size of the firm, the productivity of the firm. So those lower skilled workers, they will lose, but they will lose at decreasing rate maybe, because actually the pie is increasing, okay, their share is decreasing, but actually you don't know whether actually their share in the pie compared to their former share is decreasing. Okay, this is what this sigma versus eta is telling us. So this is a second stage pooled estimate with industry times zero fixed effect. Well, on the X neutral component, nothing. Okay, we don't find any impact of technological change or globalization, trade and export and import on X neutral component. But what we find large, really large, and I will quantify them, really large impact on the skill bias component. So techies, import and export have a deep impact on the skill bias component, okay, so of productivity. If we do the second stage by industry, what we find mixed evidence of techies and trade on omega H. Well, actually they cancel out in the pool, okay? And I have 10 minutes. We've got consistent large techie and trade effects on omega S, okay? So this is consistent with the pooled estimate. If I rerun the analysis using the broad definition of our techies, taking all of them together, okay, we find mostly the same results here, okay? The results are qualitatively similar. So the take-on from this first analysis is to tell you that actually we've got large techie and trade effects on the skill bias component at firm level. This is weighted regression, so we can say something at the aggregate level, okay? There is nothing on X neutral, so basically the techies and trade will shift demand towards skilled workers, okay? The quantification, so here I can interpret those results in terms of, I will quantify those results. So evaluated at the median positive techies, which is 0.12 in our sample, so this is 13%, this is the median of techies. What we show that going from 0 to this median, well, the techies has an impact on the skill bias component by 2.5%, okay? So 2.5%. If we look at the export and import, going from being being exporters compared to non-exporters, so the export premium in a sense, you've got an export premium by 10%. You've got an export premium by 10% on the skill bias component and an import premium by 7% on the skill bias component, which is a little bit challenged by the estimates that you find in several other papers for the US. We can compute the total impact of those techies, import and export, on output. Okay, we've got all the estimates to structurally compute that. Well, if you compute the impact on total output, 1% for techies, estimated at the median, 2% for trade for exporters, and 1% for, let's say 2% for exporters and importers. Okay, so this is a significant impact of techies and trade on total output. Okay? Here, and I'll come back to that maybe later. Here, we don't say anything about the cost of those techies. We can just like compute the cost of those techies and relate the cost of techies total versus what they bring to the firm on average. Okay, so this is what we can do. In terms of relative demand shift, basically we find that actually the techies have a deep impact on relative demand, trade as well. Okay. So all positive impact on skill-biased technologies and then on total output and relative demand shift. Now, using the second stage equation, you can compute the long-run effect. You can do that mathematically or you can do that iteratively. Okay, and we just like process the second way. This is a little bit of back-of-the-envelope computation over here. So what we find that basically the long-run or permanent effect are of those effects, I mean, on the skill augmenting component are 4 to 5 times larger, okay? So let me wrap up a little bit. So what do? We take GLZ, okay? We extend it to 4 factors. We introduce the skill and X-neutral component in the GLZ estimation. We've got a structural estimation of the productivity component and explain it using Techies, our proxy or approximation of technological change at the firm level, and trade, export and import. So we estimate the causal effect of techies and trade on both productivity components. What we find that techies have large effect on productivities, but on skill-biased productivities, okay? And since they have large effect on skill-biased productivities, they have also large effect on skill-relative demand. The results across industries are qualitatively similar. Okay, so we find SBTC. And what we also find in this analysis, we find an elasticity of demand which is larger than the elasticity of substitution, which might imply that SBTCs need not reduce employment, as we will see. I mean, it reduces employment in the US. This is what we find for the US. Need not reduce employment of less skilled workers. We're racing with the machine and not against the machine. Thank you.
So thank you very much. So we have the time for questions, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Andre. That's very, very nice paper. So I have 2 questions. The first one about on this eta versus sigma. If I understood it right, eta is the elasticity for demand at the firm level.
Yeah.
But which of course is likely to be considerably greater than at the industry level. So in some sense, it's not clear to me which one is the relevant one for the issue that you raise, which is racing with or racing against. So if this is a industry level change that's going to affect the techies, then the relevant elasticity would be the industry level elasticity of demand.
Yeah, this is a good point. I mean, this is a fairly nice point. Well, here, actually, our elasticity, the measured elasticity of demand is that this is the weighted average of those elasticities that we compute at firm level. Okay, so this is basically a weighted average. This is representative of what is the elasticity at industry level.
But
okay?
I'm not sure. Don't you control for sort of, is it not saturated at the industry level? So I think, if I understood the analysis, you're not exploiting any between industry component.
No.
So then it's really the firm level elasticity weighted so that the firm is representative at the industry level, but it's not the industry level elasticity. So it could be that, for example, I think if I'm understanding this right, different industries could be producing like Leontiev.
Yeah.
But still your eta could be quite high.
This is correct. Yeah, this is correct.
So that's just a qualification about how to interpret the result. The other one is like on this sort of causal effect. So this is sort of a bit of a difficult question, but I'm not entirely sure what causal effect here would mean, because for something like Techies, for instance, I think most reasonably we would not think that the causal effect is the same for all firms. So in other words, taking away Techies from, say, Google would be hugely costly, and I'm sure the estimates could be even larger than yours, but randomly adding Techies to a mom and pop store would probably not have the effects that you're estimating. So in other words, perhaps a more challenging but realistic model is that there is some other latent variables, manager quality, other dimensions of technology, and there is a strong complementarity between the Techies and those underlying characteristics. So under the right assumptions econometrically, which are of course complex here on the first order stochastic process, etc., and other sort of demand shifters, you are estimating some average of these effects, but it won't necessarily correspond to a simple causal effect, which is if I were to increase Techies, what would be their impact? Because if I were to increase, say, if I open one more professional schools and there are more Techies, where will they go? It's not clear. It's not the same as taking away from the current companies that are the ones perhaps that are most valuing Techies because they have most to gain from Techies.
No, this is correct. I mean, this is again, so controlling for quality we cannot, basically. In the second stage, there is no way to control for the quality of those Techies.
No, but it's not the quality of the Techies. It's more like the underlying quality or characteristics of the companies that makes the value of the Techies more or less.
Yeah, but actually, in the second stage, control Markov process, let me put it like this: all the average characteristic of the firms are taken into account by the lag productivity components. So if it is true, basically you will control for persistence and selections. And if you control for persistence and selection in the second stage, you might think that actually those Techies have a causal impact. Now from this econometric point of view, with a controlled Markov process, given the fact, conditional on the fact that you are controlling for the persistence and selection effect with the lagged productivity components, they might not be. There are causal impacts. Where we are not 100% clean is there might be some other variables that are, and this is why I was thinking about the quality, that are entering the second stage and are not controlled in our second stage specification.
So I think the point, if I can just elaborate, I think you've given an explanation for the econometric identifying assumptions for why they are causal effects, and that may or may not be. I mean, I'm not questioning that. It's a very hard problem. But what I'm saying is that even if those assumptions are right, if the effects of the Techies are heterogeneous by firms, which almost by definition has to be true, then even under those assumptions being right, you're estimating a weighted average of those heterogeneities, which is very different from what the causal effect in the sense of, say, Rubin, Angrist, Imbens, which is I take some Techies and randomly allocate them to a company would be, because you're exploiting them according to along the equilibrium path choices that firms have made. And in particular, Google, which has a higher value for Techies, has used them, and mom and pop stores, which have a lower value, haven't used them. At the margin, you're capturing those right under the econometric assumptions, but it's not going to be informative about if I now add additional techies and they go to some companies, they randomly selected or otherwise, because that's going to be for some particular values of heterogeneity.
Yeah, I see the point. I mean, point taken.
Thank you very much. So we have to conclude. Maybe we give a last applause.
Thank you.